Hello and welcome to my I'm Allie Kay, and if you don't know, I do these live painting demos every Monday at 5 Eastern. So sometimes we paint portraits, sometimes it's flowers like the ones behind me here. And I'm also excited to be diving into some other things coming up soon, so stay tuned for that. We're gonna have some new subjects coming, maybe some figure painting, maybe some other still life, so we're gonna be doing some adventures coming up. But today, I am going to paint this beautiful. So I've got my underpainting mostly set up. I haven't done my wash yet, but the way that I start my pieces is I transfer my outlines and then I paint over them in kind of a muted purple, and then I just do a wash, just kind of mapping out the shadows. Because that gives me just a really good kind of basis roadmap to go off of. And I do get a lot of questions about transferring the lines, and I've talked about this a lot, but I know we always jumping in, so I'm gonna just show you real quick. Hi Sharon, and anyone else who is watching, please feel free to jump in and say hi. You are the ones that are watching this live, so you get to ask questions, and I'm excited to interact with you a little bit. Now going back to the transfer, I'm just going to show you that one more time real quick. So I printed out a black and white image of this little girl, and then I used some transfer paper. I get this in big rolls. I think I get it from Dick Blick. It's either Dick Blick or Jerry's Artorama. But this comes in a 24-foot roll, so you can get a whole bunch of it. And then I just trace over the major forms in the face. You can kind of see where my lines are. And then that gives me a really nice, accurate picture on my piece. And then when I do my wash, I just kind of give myself a little bit of indication of what those lines mean by doing the wash. Hi, Debbie. Hi, Susan and Melissa. Debbie's watching from San Antonio, Texas. Very cool. I love that I get to just like kind of connect with people all over the place. I used to live in Texas. I lived in Houston, and now I'm here in Tennessee. So, okay, I think we will just jump right in and get started. So I'm going to just bring the camera in a little bit closer here so that you guys can see of what we're doing, because you didn't come here to see me, you came here to see my painting. So now I think you can see it pretty well. And oh, hi Darrell. Oh, I am so glad that you made it. All right, so as I said, we've got the underpainting on, and now I'm going to go in with the wash of color. So my wash over my skin tones is going to be Permanent Dark Violet by Golden. And if you've watched many of my demos, you know that this is my go-to color under skin. I love this color. So I'm just going to thin it out with some water, and I've got a big fat brush. And I'm just gonna do a thin wash over all of the skin and the hair. So let's see, it's gonna be really thin and drippy, that's okay. This is a really smooth panel I'm working on, so it's running a little bit more than what I'm used to. But that's okay, I'm just gonna catch it. So in this stage, I'm not worried about brush strokes or anything like that. I'm just putting a layer of and the reason that I'm using purple under the skin tones is I'm considering the skin tones kind of a peach. So I work with a complex. Consider the opposite of peach to be this kind of purple tone. Now, if we call the skin tones red, the true opposite would be green. However, I never put green under skin because what happens is the person kind of looks dead and we don't want that. So purple's a really nice color to put under skin tones. Hi, Lisa. Glad you made it. All right. So I've got a pretty good wash under the skin. And the areas of skin that I know are going to be lighter, I'm going to leave my wash lighter. So I know it's going to be really light on the edge of the face and up at the top of the hair. So I'm going to leave that really light. Now the areas where I know the skin will be a little bit darker, I'm going to go back and just add an extra pass of purple in those areas. And I started already kind of building up that shadow with my underpainting, but now I'm just going to push. I have kind of an old brush that's splitting on me. I'm about due for new brushes. I like square tip brushes, and I don't buy very expensive ones because I like to just throw them away after a while. So that is my tip with brushes. They don't have to be the most amazing brushes, just buy them often and toss them in when they start to split, because it's hard to do much with a brush that's on you when you're trying to make these nice juicy brushes. Getting a little heavy there. All right. Oh, forgot her little pigtails. They need some purple. I get to paint the most adorable children. Fun job. Okay, I think this is a good amount of underpainting. So now I'm going to do the underpainting for the background. And the background is mostly grays and cool greens. So for the background, I'm going to do two different colors in the background. The first one is going to be a warm burnt orange color that I will make using, alizarin crimson and Hansa yellow opaque. And if you don't know, I am using all golden fluid acrylics. So any color that I mentioned, colors. These are the colors I like to work with. Golden also has heavier body paints, but the way that I paint, I prefer the thinner paints. Okay, so I've got a nice burnt orange color, and I'm going to put that into the background. Ooh, I got a chunk of paint there. Scoop that out. I'm gonna put that into the background. Now, I can see that the background is darker than her. You see, we've got this glowing edge. So when I put in my dark underpainting, I'm thinking about making this color darker than the wash of purple. That's gonna be really important to pay attention to that stuff. What it does is it makes it less work for me as I'm building up the painting. If I'm paying attention to what should be light and what should be dark from the beginning, it makes less work for me. So that's why I do it. All right, so we've got some nice burnt orange here underpainting. Now I mentioned that I was going to do two different colors for the underpainting. My next color is going to be fun. I'm going to go in with some magenta for the underpainting. And the reason I'm switching is not because of anything that I'm specifically seeing in my reference image. It is simply because it's my painting and I can do what I want to. But this magenta, when it's quinacridone magenta, you probably can't see it that well. It is going to tie into the pink that I'm going to put into her little ruffles there. So I think it'll be fun to have a little bit of this magenta poking through in the background, just to kind of play around. It's just a really intense, fun color. So I'm just gonna pop some of it in there. I could do a whole background with the magenta, but this being such a strong color, I kind of like to just pop it into a few places, especially a small painting like this, rather than doing the whole painting in the magenta in the background. And I'm not really worried about the fact that some of this color is getting into her, because that's just gonna make it more interesting. So don't worry so much about staying right at perfect edges. It's gonna be better. All right, so now we're gonna think about what we wanna do for the underpainting of her dress. Now her dress is white and blue. I'm just gonna consider the whole thing blue. I'm just gonna call it blue. So I'm going to think about my underpainting color, what would be a good opposite for blue. And really the opposite on the color wheel for blue is orange. So I think I'm going to go back to my burnt. I'm not going to use as much of the alizarin crimson. So I'm going to add more Hansa yellow to that to make it a more of a mustard type orange, and a little bit of water to thin it out. And I think I'm going to use that for my underpainting on the dress. We'll see how that looks. Maybe a little more alizarin crimson in there. It's a little too yellow for me. For some reason, I just don't like yellow. I don't know why. But if I do have to use yellow, it's green yellow or a very mustard yellow. I'm not a fan of like sunshine yellow. Just watching your comments here. Stephanie says she loves watching my process. Hey girl, how are you? Thanks for watching. I haven't talked to you forever. Hope you're doing well. All right, so I'm just being really loose how I'm mapping this out. Oh, I was going to mention, when you're doing your underpainting washes, you don't want to white in your recipe. And the reason is that if I had white in this recipe, it would cover up my outlines that I put in, and I wouldn't be able to see what I had done. So when you're working in the underpainting, you really just want it to be a wash. All right, so now we have all of our underpainting in there. And now I'm going to just kind of push some of my shadows a little bit darker. And I'm going to do that with a very thin wash of some burnt umber. I'm just gonna thin my paint out. And actually, I'm gonna start thinning my paint with some glaze. And for glaze, I'm not specific. So I'm using Liquitex glaze. You can use glaze by Golden. You can use any brand of glaze. It really doesn't matter. I like matte finish because I don't want it to be too shiny. But after I've done my underpainting, that's usually when I switch to thinning with glaze rather than water, because it doesn't run as much and it just gives it a little bit more luscious quality. So we're just going to start pushing those shadows a little bit more. So I'm squinting at my piece, I'm squinting at my reference image, and I'm just looking for what are the areas that are showing up the darkest. I'm still not worrying about what color they are. I'm really just looking at the value. And I just realized we kind of have a glare on the reference image. So you probably, you can see the color a little bit better now, I think. It's tricky to have my painting well lit and not have the light shining on the iPad. So I hope that works a little bit better for y'all to see. So let's see, I've got some shadow in the hair, and that's gonna make her face look lighter as I push that. Sometimes rather than making one area lighter, I just make the area next to it darker, and then that has a result of making the area that I want to be. Now, there's some interesting lighting on her face. There's a strong light shining on the left side of her face, and nothing else in her face is going to be as bright as this really bright light that's shining on the left side. So that's something that I have to be careful of as I'm building up my painting, because if my highlight on her nose or over here on the cheek, if it's brighter than this glowing edge right here, what that's going to do is it's going to make this edge not seem as dramatic. To pick the brightest spot and make sure you allow that to stay the brightest spot, especially in one of these unique pieces where we do have such dramatic lighting. Not every painting is like that, where the lighting's so strong, but it's an important component. All right. and I edited my reference image in an app called PixArt. Many of you who've been watching my demos have heard that over and over again, but I still like to mention it for the new people. Filter in PixArt called Geode, and you can kind of adjust like how much you apply the filter. It makes the shapes a little more dramatic, and it pulls out some more interesting colors. So it just makes your reference image a little bit easier to paint from, and it just helps you to see some more interesting values. So that's helpful. There's a lot of other apps and filters too that will do the same thing, and it depends what I'm painting. I like that Geode filter the best for portraits. I don't really like it for a landscape. So if I'm going to filter a landscape photo or like one of my treescapes, I will usually use a filter that I find in Photoshop, and it's called Paint Daubs. And it has more of like a speckled quality to it, which kind of mimics the way the leaves look in the light. All right. Hi, Kathy. Oh, yeah. Isn't this little girl so cute? I can't wait to paint her. It's so fun because when clients send me photos of their adorable kids or grandkids, it's usually the very best photo that they would like me to paint. So I always get to see just them at their very best, looking so cute. All right. So we're just starting to kind of build more and more up. If I was working on this one on my own, I might spend a little on the underpainting than what I'm going to do right now. And the reason for that is just that I want to kind of get into the color because we have a short amount of time. We just have an hour. So I want to kind of move through my process as much as I can in that hour and teach you as much as I can. So I'm going to probably jump in and start adding in some color. But I'm still just using this burnt umber light, in case you were wondering. That's all that's on my brush right now. And I'm just jumping around and adding in where I see shadow. And don't forget to ask any questions or make comments or say whatever you're thinking. All right, I'm kind of pulling my body back just to look a little bit from further away. It's really hard, especially when you're working on a small piece. It's hard when you're like right on top of it for so long. You got to get yourself away from it once in a while. I recommend like going all the way across the room and looking at it before you get like hung up on just one area. All right. I think that's enough underpainting. Okay, so we're going to start putting in her skin tones. And my color combination that I use to make skin is almost always titanium, pyrrole red light, a little bit of Hansa yellow opaque, and burnt umber light. So I make just about all my skin using those four colors in different quantities. So it just varies depending on what it is that I am painting. And when you layer on top of the purple, your skin tone will always have a tendency to look more yellow than the way it appears on your palette. With that, by adding a little more red than I think I should, and then it usually looks correct when I put it on my piece. Terry says, I'm thinking I wish I could nail those shadows like you do. Well, honestly, Terry, I think this is just a practice thing. I think it's a matter of doing this over and over again and where it just like immediately comes to you. Because I've painted a few portraits over the years. Okay, so I am using, let's see, what number brush am I using? I'm using a number 3 brush, and it's a square tip brush. This is a Royal Langnickel brush. And I'm just going to start kind of looking at about the lightest 50% of her face, but I'm not going to go into the very brightest because I'm going to use a different color for that, like that very bright edge. But I'm just starting to kind of carve out some of the highlights, and I might be a little too dark. I never really know until I start laying it down. So I'm just going to start dropping this color in and we'll see how it looks. But I am thinking about leaving little bits of that purple showing through along the way. So I'm leaving some spaces between the brush strokes. I also have my paint kind of thin with the glaze to allow for some of that purple to peek through. And I mention this a lot, that it's really easy to get carried away and cover up all your purple, especially on a small painting like this, because there's not a whole lot of surface that we're working with. So be very, very careful in these early stages not to cover everything up. Because sometimes I might leave a big area all purple because that purple might suit it really well for the shadow that's going on there. And shadows are more interesting as a purple than they are as like a gray or a neutral color. So, you know, I feel like if a shadow can be purple, let it be purple. Why not? Really, in real life, we see purple in our shadows. So sometimes our brain takes over and our brain starts telling us, oh, well, skin tone is peaches and creams and browns, but actually skin tone, light falling on it, however it makes it look. There is a cool purple light or a blue light landing on skin, then that's the color of the skin. All right. So you see how I'm just jumping around? I'm not just like painting in her nose or painting in one eye or an ear. I'm like looking at the whole panel. It helps me to stay kind of looser. It helps me to paint more quickly. And it helps me just to not get carried away in an area. So, and when I paint on my own, I don't always put this color everywhere that I see it right off. I might switch and start doing my highlights sooner, but when I do demos and when I teach classes, I like to be a little more organized so that you can follow me a little bit better. So I try to just kind of put this in all the places it needs to go right off the bat, rather than being completely scattered. That could be confusing. Too. So even though the hair is blonde hair, very similar to the way skin does. So there's not a huge difference there. All right. So now put a little bit more in. All right. Now I'm going to lighten it just a pinch. So I'm going to add a little bit more white to my mixture. And just start pulling out some of the slightly brighter highlights. But some of these highlights that I'm seeing next are a little bit cooler. So I think I'm actually going to just put a little drop of purple in there too. So I'm adding some white and a little speck of purple to my skin mixture, which I was already working with. And we're going to see. That's working. So it's kind of like we're starting in the middle and we're working our way out. All right, is everybody there? I lost you for a second. Y'all, somebody tell me that you're here and you can hear me. For some reason, Somebody wave. All right. Working on those slightly lighter values. Hopefully I still have you with me. All right. That was funny. I don't know why that happened. These lives, you just never know. Sometimes it just doesn't work technically. But I think we're still good. All right, Janice says she can hear me now, but you're cutting in and out. Oh man, I'm sorry that's happening. It was telling me poor connection for some reason. So I haven't dealt with that lately, but hopefully we stay good. All right, so you can see I did the next level of some slightly lighter tones. All right, Debbie's here, Kathy's here. Terry says it keeps getting interrupted. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna do the best I can. I don't know why. Let me just... Okay, are you guys there? I figured out the problem. I was working off of Wi-Fi, which is not strong enough. So now we're not on Wi-Fi anymore. And I think we're gonna be good. So there we go. All right, so we did some midtones, and now I'm going to go in and I'm going to do that brightest light over here on the left that I mentioned. So that's going to be really bright, and I'm going to make that using, let's see, what am I going to use? I'm going to use the same mixture. I'm just going to dump a bunch of more white into it to really brighten that up. And maybe I'll put a little more yellow in there because that feels kind of warm, that light, especially up on her cheek. Carrie is asking, PixArt with a C or PixArt with an X? It is with a C, so it's PixArt. Yes. All right, now we're gonna put this really bright light in on the edge of her, and I might actually brighten this up a notch more, but I like to usually kind of wait till closer to the end to get to the very brightest. So for right now, that's how I'm going to do it. I've got a little on her ear and a little bit dripping down the edge of her cheek there, and then it picks up on the neck and it's pretty bright there. And then we see it on her shoulder. We've got a strong light coming down her shoulder. Now down towards the bottom, the strong light actually gets a little more purple, so I might go back and adjust that, but for right now, I'm gonna leave it like this. And I'm gonna use this bright light on the hair too, because it's very bright up here, almost white up at the top. So I'm just gonna start pulling that out. And she's kind of got like this halo effect of the hair is picking up the light behind her and just really glowing, which makes it for a really interesting picture and painting. Usually I try to steer away from somebody who's too backlit if we can't see their features, if their features are just too dark. But that's not the case with this one. We can still see her features even though she's backlit. So I didn't have a problem with that. All right, put a little bit in there. Okay, that's enough of my very bright light. Starting to come together. Hi, Kim, thanks for joining me. Okay, I think now I want to just jump in and start doing some detail in the eyes, because I always like to kind of get the eyes resolved first. It just makes the person start to feel more human right off the bat. So I'm going to start by putting in the whites of the eyes. And when I do that, I'm going to zoom in on my screen and look at just the eyes. And you'll notice that the whites of the eyes are actually very, very dark. So they're really not white at all. So I'm going to make a dark purple, and I will use Payne's Gray and alizarin crimson and white for that. And it's going to be much darker than what you would think the whites of the eyes should be, but trust me, it's gonna be just fine. I'm gonna thin that with a little bit of glaze and see how that looks. And I've got my tiny little script liner brush here to start putting in these little dark whites of the eyes. And I'm still leaving a lot of purple. And there's very little of the shape that's actually showing. I can't exactly tell what color her eyes are. They kind of look like maybe a hazel color. So actually, I think her grandmother might be watching. If you want to tell me what color her eyes are, I'll make it correct. Otherwise, I'll adjust it later. But now I'm going to start just putting some of the darker tones in there. So I'm going to use the same color recipe, alizarin crimson, Payne's Gray, and white, and I'm just going to start putting in some of the dark shadows that I see, like where the lashes are. I don't actually see any specific lashes, so I'm not going to paint them in individually. I'm just going to darken the area where I know that they are. And I also have dark tones around the edges of the iris. So I'm going to use the same color to put that in. And eyes are kind of glassy, you know, because they're kind of wet, and so we see a lot of reflections there. And so letting all these little different colors poke through, like the purple showing through, is just going to make that look more interesting and really just more natural. So I'm going to add in a little bit of burnt umber and white and just a tiny speck of Hansa yellow to put a little color in her iris and see how that looks. And it's sometimes very difficult to tell in a photo what color the eyes really are. And usually for a commission, clients want to see the eyes the way that they know they are. So sometimes I'll just ask and then go back and adjust it. And it's usually not a very big deal to make a little adjustment, but we're just putting in kind of a little bit of a brownish green tone in there is what I'm guessing that I see. And now I'm going to put in the pupil, which would be pretty much black, but I never use black. So I'm going to put the pupil in with Payne's Gray and alizarin crimson. That's my go-to recipe for a dark color, which makes a nice dark, dirty purple. And I'm going to put that dark pupil in there. And I'm going to darken the lashes just over the pupil too, so that that pupil doesn't just stand out all by itself. And now I'm going to add just that tiny little bit of sparkle that always makes eyes look more real. And it's not bright white on this one. It's a little bit more muted. So I'm just going to add a little bit of white to my recipe that I was using for the iris color, the brown tone. I'm just going to add some white to it and create a little bit of highlight on there, on that one, and a little bit more over here. And then the eye on this side does have a slightly brighter white dot of flashing there, so I'm going to go back and brighten up just that one. Just put that in there. Yeah, I think I want to add it over here, even though I don't really see it. I'm just going to add a little bit over there too. Okay, so we're starting to get the eyes in there, and it's probably hard for you to see the eyes because this is a small painting. but they're coming together. I think I'm gonna lighten up the whites of the eyes just a pinch. So I'm gonna go back to that recipe I was using, which was Payne's Gray, alizarin crimson, and white. And I'm just gonna brighten up the white of the eye a tiny notch brighter. It's usually easier to go a notch brighter than to go backwards as you're layering in the color. So that's why I always say stay a little bit on the lighter side. On the darker side with the whites of the eyes. Okay, got those in. All right, now I want to put a little color on the mouth so that we start to get some form there. And for the lips, I will mix up kind of a muted pink color, and I'm going to use alizarin crimson and some white. Actually, that looks pretty good like that. I'm gonna start with the upper lip with alizarin crimson and white, and I'm gonna add some glaze. And I'm just gonna see how that looks. Yeah, that looks good. I think a lot of the time we have a tendency to make the lips a little too red, especially the upper lip, which is in shadow. It's really not that red. We do see a little bit more pink and red on the highlight on the lower lip. So I'm putting this dark color in the corners. And then I'm gonna make it a little bit more red by adding a little bit of cadmium red. And that is more of like a true fire truck red. So I'm gonna add a little drop of that to my alizarin crimson and add a little bit of white there too to make this a brighter red. And I'll just put that on that highlight on the lower lip. So lower lip is almost always brighter than the upper lip because the upper lip is in shadow. So most of the time that is the case. And most of the time you have kind of like a wet looking highlight on that lower lip because it is usually a little bit wet and picking up a little bit of reflection. So now that I put the lips in, I feel like I need to add some of those teeth in because they're looking too bright. I actually need to push those darker. Right now they just have a wash of purple on them. And a very common error that we can run into is making the teeth too bright. And also another issue can be like making them too defined. So we don't want that to happen. So let me think about how we're going to do this. I'm going to mix up, I'm just going to use some alizarin crimson and a little bit of burnt umber to make kind of a nice dark reddish brown color. And I'm going to put that under the teeth because I see a darker shadow under these teeth. And I'm gonna put it on the skin that kind of drops down between the teeth. And then I'm just gonna do a really thin wash of the burnt umber over the teeth just to knock it down a little bit so they're not quite so bright. The teeth on the sides are always going to be darker than the teeth in the front because the ones in the front are catching the highlight. I'm gonna let that dry and then I'll come back and lighten up those front teeth a little bit. But while we're waiting for that, I'm going to start putting some of the background in just to make this background not quite so distracting. And I'm gonna look at our time. Okay, we got about 20 minutes left. Usually when I do these live demos, I don't complete the whole painting in an hour, but I like to get a good feeling of how the piece is gonna look in our first hour, and then I'll come back to it and add some more detail. But I'm going to start with just a nice kind of muted green. And so I will make that using phthalo green, And phthalo is super strong, so whenever you use phthalo green, you have to knock it down with some other stuff. You use phthalo green and some white, and then I'm going to put a bunch of burnt umber in there to knock it back. And I will also thin it with some glaze so that we can see some of our underpainting showing through. It's amazing how much burnt umber you need to add to the phthalo to knock it down so that it doesn't look super emerald and like take over your piece. So let's peek at how this looks. Yeah, I like a little bit of that, I think. I think I want a little more glaze in there to show more of my underpainting. And I'm kind of offloading my brush. Yeah. So the darkest areas of my green are up here. I'm going to put the darkest areas in first, and then I'm going to lighten it a little bit. And we've got some dark here. We've got some dark coming in between her pigtails there. And you can see how I'm just like letting my brush strokes show in the background. I'm not trying to paint anything to look like real trees or anything like that. I'm just letting it be brush strokes and letting them be pretty random. Okay, now I'm going to lighten them a little bit by adding some more white, and then they're also going to be getting a little bit more opaque because we've added some white to them. And this is kind of more of a minty color, but I think this is going to look kind of pretty, giving her more of like a halo effect around her. The hair kind of dissolves right into the background. So if we lighten up the background, like at the edges of the hair, it helps those two kind of melt together, which I think is kind of neat. And sometimes I don't choose my background color until I've done more of the painting, because sometimes I like for it to kind of play off of the painting. But in this case, I want you to see it with more of the background covered up. So we don't just see all the pink. Okay, so down towards the bottom, the background gets a little bit more neutral. So we will, let's see, how am I going to make my neutral? I'm going to add some purple to my green. That'll neutralize it a little bit. All right. And it's going to darken it just a little bit. And I'm going to put some of that down towards the bottom here. All right. So that's starting to make her feel a little bit more anchored. And then we'll move on from there. So I think next I want to put a little bit of color on her dress to start covering up some of that mustard tone. And I'm going to start with the areas that are reading as white. So I know these really aren't white. There's definitely some more blue in there. So I'm going to mix up my bluish white using white and a little bit of phthalo blue, which, just like the phthalo green, is also super intense. So we just need a tiny speck of it, like a really tiny speck of it. And then I'm going to thin it with some glaze. And I'm going to add a little bit of purple too, to make it more of a purpley periwinkle blue-white, which is going to look really pretty against the mustard. Okay, so now I'm looking for the areas that read as white. And I'm not worrying about getting those stripes in just right, because that would drive me crazy. And I think it won't look as good if we put those stripes in too perfectly. So we're just lightly touching it and letting that mustard tone show through. You guys are quiet today. Does anybody have any questions or comments, observations, whatever? I'm going to show a little bit of the stripe there. Move that over. I posted today about how I do offer like one-on-one consultations. So I did that with a student this morning who had purchased one of my portrait kits. So my portrait kits came with kind of like a startup directions and a template for your personal portrait. And you can still purchase those, but I'm also offering just these 20-minute consultations where we can talk about whatever you want. So you would send me the painting that you're working on that you want to talk about and the image that you're working off of. And then we just kind of go through it and I tell you what I think you can do to improve on it, or what's working really well. And then it comes to you as a recording that you can go back and reference as you work more on it. So I'm really excited about those. I've been doing several of those and I think there's going to be a future in doing a lot more. Because I think a lot of times you might have a piece that you are just really just struggling to know what's going to make it work. And sometimes when you get fresh eyes, I can instantly tell you what's going to work. All right, so we started to carve out some of those highlights. Now I'm going to brighten my blue mixture a little bit more and pull some out that are slightly brighter. So I'm just going to add some more white to it and just brighten that up a pinch more. So the brightest areas are up here on the left shoulder. I think you're seeing this as a mirror image, so it's probably showing up as the right shoulder to you, but for me it's the left. I wish that didn't happen with Facebook Lives, but it does. All right. Okay, so now that I've got some of that white in there, now I'm going to push some of the blue stripes, just a tiny bit. I'm going to mix up a darker blue and just start showing a little bit of that pattern. So I'll make my blue using Payne's Gray, which is really like a navy blue. Payne's Gray and white. And just the tiniest little speck of that phthalo blue, but it's going to be mostly Payne's Gray and white, and then some glaze. And I think that'll be good. Okay. And like I said, I'm not going to try to make all the stripes line up with what I see here because it's just not important and it just makes it look fake if it's too perfectly accurate like that. And really, when we look at a pattern, our eyes don't read every individual component of the pattern. So if you have the overall lights and darks in the areas that they're supposed to be, it doesn't matter if all the little details are in the same places because your eye is still going to read it as being accurate, an accurate representation of that pattern. So that's something to think about when you're working on patterns. And don't be afraid of putting patterns in paintings. I think sometimes people can be kind of overwhelmed or intimidated by the idea of including pattern on clothes because it's just like so much to try to get accurate, but you don't have to do it accurate. So that's what works. All right, now I want to drop those little bits of pink in because I just think that's going to be really fun. And so I want to have time to put that in. So I'm going to make the pink using the same magenta that I used in the background here, but then I'm going to add a little bit of white to it to lighten it up. I need to get some clean white because my white's all dirty. If you're trying to get a really bright, intense color like that magenta, you have to be sure that your colors are not contaminated, because if there's like the slightest little bit of like brown or blue or something in your white, and then that gets mixed in with your pink mixture, it's gonna kill your color. So when I know that I want it to be like a really intense pink, I'll just go to a new spot on my palette and I will just get some fresh colors to work with. All right, I think this is gonna be good. All right. I think I wanted a little darker magenta. Yeah, I can add some bright highlights to it later, but I think that's such a pretty color. I love this magenta. Terrell says her shirt looks perfect. Oh, thank you. Well, it's gonna get more detail, but for right now, I'm glad that it's starting to kind of represent how it looks. So we just do some little sparkles there. I'll probably make this little white or this pink trim glow a little bit more as I layer. Checking our time. What do we have? We've got 8 minutes left. Okay, I want to get some color in the hair. Some of these kind of cooler brownish grayish tones that are showing up in the center we haven't really done. We've pretty much just done warm tones. So I'm going to mix up some hair color, and I'm going to use some burnt umber light. My paintbrushes or my bottles of paint, the little hole always gets clogged, so I have to have a needle right next to me to be like loosening that up all the time. Okay, so I'm going to do burnt umber light and some white for the hair, and I'm going to add a little bit of purple to it and see how that looks. And then I'm going to thin it with some glaze. Okay, so I'm going to start putting some of that shadow. Now this may look very gray to you, but that's actually how the color looks. It's pretty dark right here. So don't be afraid or thinking, well, she's a little girl and she doesn't have gray hair. But blonde hair actually has a lot of gray tones in it because it's cooler than the warm skin. So I promise in the end it won't look like gray hair, but there will be some areas of cooler color. And I kind of have to back up to see what I'm doing here. Okay, so up here I went too dark. I'm seeing here it's actually much lighter up there. So I'm going to add some more white to my mixture. Need more white. I buy my white golden paint by the gallon because I go through so much of it. The other bottles, I mean, I would say you could just buy like the 4-ounce bottles, and you probably don't need gallons of white, but I go through a lot. Okay, so we're gonna do these lighter, cool highlights, which make this highlight up at the top look even warmer, and that's okay. That's what I'm going for. But I'm not doing full coverage. You see how I'm still letting that purple show through, and I'm not painting individual strands of hair. I'm looking for the larger clumps of hair. Oh, we have some bright on her little pigtail here that I totally missed. I'm gonna have to add that in. I'm gonna do that right away. So this bright color is gonna be a little bit more of a yellow to it, but it's gonna be that same 4-color skin recipe, the Hansa yellow, pie roll red, burnt umber light, except I'm gonna add a little bit more yellow to it and a little bit more white to it to lighten that up and get that highlight on her little pigtail there that's missing. It's so funny when you're really focused on a piece, it's like you can miss this big chunk because you're just like so focused on other areas. And that's kind of like going back to my critique sessions, how when I have fresh eyes, I can see it right away if there might be like a big area that you missed that'll make all the difference. Putting some of those warm tones here too. And we'll put some up here. Okay. Now we need to get some brighter orange tones, like reddish orange in the ears, because when someone is backlit, the light will shine through their ears, and so you'll get kind of like this glowing reddish orange color coming through at the ears. So the way that I'm going to make that is by using my same 4-color skin recipe, but I'm going to add a lot more of the pyrrole red and also a little bit more of the Hansa Yellow Opaque to make a more intense saturated tone. And I'll just pop that in at the edges of the ears. And that's going to make her start looking a lot more natural. And actually it gets pretty red right there. So I'm going to pick a new little spot and go in with just about straight red and yellow and mix up a really bright tone there in just that one area. I'm going to do that pop. And a little bit over there. A little bit down there too. Okay. But now I'm going to go back to that other kind of warm edge that I used on the edge of her ear, and I'm going to pop that into a few places on her face too, just to warm that up a little bit. We really haven't added much dimension to the face yet. I haven't put a whole lot of layers into the face at all. You know, I mostly just kind of worked on getting the features in there and started to develop, you know, the background in her shirt. So I kind of just jumped around and added a lot of different things. And so now I'll go back and start kind of cleaning up some of the skin tones. We have a few areas of a cool highlight on her face that are like almost a purpley blue. And so I want to pop those blue highlights in too. So I'm going to go with, well, I think I might do just the permanent dark violet and some white and just see how that looks. That's probably a little more dramatic than what they are, but I think it might be fun to just put a little bit of that purple back on top. Okay, so I'm seeing some purple highlights on her eye and along the edge of her face, and a little bit over here. And you see how I'm not blending at all? I'm just like putting these colors in and letting them sit. Now I think that this highlight needs to get a little brighter here, especially the one under her eye. So I'm going to add some more white to my mixture there. And just lighten that up a little bit more. And then we've got kind of this light purple highlight under her nose and on the edge of her nose. I think that's going to do a lot. Yeah, that helped a lot. So when you're painting skin, just really paying attention to what areas are warm and what areas are cool. is going to be really helpful. Now I want to make this edge that I mentioned was going to be the very brightest. I want to make that glow even more. So I'm going to go back in with just about straight white and just tint it the tiniest bit with some yellow and maybe a little bit of red too to make it kind of like a peach. And I'm just gonna pull that out a little bit more, and then I think we're gonna be wrapping it up for this demo. But I'm very glad you all joined me today. It's really been fun doing these. I'm glad I started doing them. So I figured I'm painting anyways, I might as well be teaching at the same time. All right, so when I do my very brightest highlight, I like to let it be really opaque because I really want it to stand out. And when you build up some darker colors in the background, when you do that bright highlight, it has a dramatic effect because it's contrasted by those colors in the background. Okay, I want to put just a few bright blues on her shoulder because I feel like her whole dress has kind of got a similar treatment, and I see that it's much brighter on this side of her dress. So I think I want to pop that out just a little bit more. So I'm going to go back to my fresh white color. Like I mentioned, it needs to be not contaminated. And I'm going to use that with just a tiny speck of phthalo blue and just put some really nice little pops in there. My brush is a little bit dirty though. I need to rinse that off. I actually didn't even get back into working on her teeth, so that's probably where I'm going to go next. But sometimes when you're doing those details like the teeth, that can be kind of a tedious, slow process. So I didn't want to bog you guys down with that. So, oh yeah, this little pop of blue will really be nice. And I think we'll put some up here, a little on the edge there, just to show that like the edges of her dress are picking up more light than the center because that's where the light is coming from. Yeah, that works. Maybe a little bit of light in the center. I'm going to darken my blue just a pinch and put that little bit of that in the middle of her. Because I really like that blue phthalo, that phthalo blue color. So I usually use it as much as I can. Even if I don't see it in a painting, I just add it. I just think it's really pretty. But you can definitely overdo it with this color, so less is more. Okay, we are after 6, so I'm going to wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for joining me on this demo. And I'm just gonna look real quick at the comments here. Lisa's asking, how will you transition the neck shadow into the body? So you mean like right here, I guess, where it's coming down? I'll probably just kind of pick a tone that's in between these two and just add a dash of it right there, but I won't make this all that soft. I'll just kind of let it be how it is for the most part. And let's see. Oh, I think that's good. Thank you, Angie. All right, well, thank you so much for watching, and I hope that I will see you next week. And in the meantime, feel free to check out some of my videos that I have on my YouTube channel. You can find me on there, Allie K Studio on YouTube. or you can actually watch all of my live videos as replays on my Facebook page. So there's quite a few of them up there now. So I highly recommend checking those out too. All right, thanks guys. Have a great night. Bye.